Hey there, Radioheads. Welcome to another episode of Radio KBE. So, for this episode, I wanted to cover this idea that Patrick Beverly, and this is not just about him, but just the idea that's been being presented by writers and folks in the front office who tell this to writers that Patrick Beverly can be a primary wing defender for the Lakers. And it's something in the last video that I mentioned that was not a good idea, and that's not a good way. You're sort of putting him at a disadvantage. I tweeted out about it like a day or two ago, and a lot of people shared it and whatnot. But the point, the purpose of today's episode is just to kind of illustrate why I don't think that's a good idea. And I'm going to use an example of two teams that Pat played against. One is the Mavs when he was on the Clippers, and then the second one will also be when he was on the Clippers, but it's against the Suns. And specifically, what I wanted to do was I wanted to highlight how he is able to defend a wing in a guy like Luka Doncic um, versus a guy like Devin Booker. There's a difference, right? So Luka is like 6'7", maybe 6'8". He's I would say probably about like 250 pounds, maybe probably less than that. He's probably like 225 or something like that. But he's definitely got probably about 40, 50 pounds on Pat. And then Devin Booker is not that much bigger than Pat, right? Devin's probably 6'3", 6'4", at the very most, but not as heavy set, and obviously not that much of a bigger player, physically imposing player. So he has a little bit of height on him. And so what I wanted to do was I pulled tape from the playoff run that the Clippers had, where they beat Dallas, and then it was the run where they finally made it to the Western Conference Finals. And the purpose of this video, so before I get into it, you guys can see in the background, I've got the video queued up. The purpose of this video is to help folks understand why using him as a wing defender is an issue, and how teams will try and take advantage of just kind of the matchup against him. This is not a video to show people like what Pat is not good at, because he is a very good defender. He has extremely good technical skills defensively. He has very good intuition. He's takes all kinds of angles to poke the ball away against a live dribble and stuff like that. He's a really wonderful rebounder. He's probably one of the best screen navigators I think I've ever seen, like in the history of the NBA. Like there are certain guys who just navigate screens like just like a shark in water, and Pat is actually really good at doing stuff like that. It actually reminds me a lot of a guy like Tony Allen, who used to be extremely good at navigating screens and stuff like that. And that's probably one of Pat's best skills, the fact that he can navigate screens and sort of minimize the impact of screens. But screens do have an impact. You just try to minimize as much as you can. So for this episode, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cover a couple of clips similar to like what I did with the Thomas Bryant episode, and just kind of look through it, just kind of do the exercise with you guys, so that it's easier for people to understand what I mean when I say that he shouldn't be tasked as the primary wing defender. So let's go ahead and jump right into that, and I'll reduce myself here. So the first few clips that I have here, are going to be about isolation situations, or just specific situations that involve Pat against Luka. And I want you to just watch what happens when Pat plays Luka. So this very first clip that you're going to watch right here is Luka putting Patrick Beverly in the post. So let me go ahead and play it.
9-4 Mavs, 4 minutes gone by, both Clipper baskets.
Let me actually turn down the volume so it's not too loud.
By Zubats, the rest of the team is 0 for 6, and
so very simple. Like you can see very simply like what happens here. Luka posts up Pat. Pat doesn't have a size advantage or a height advantage, so he has to give some ground to Luka, because Luka's going to try and bully him into the paint. So Pat kind of tries to take a gamble to see if he can block, time Luka's layup or block him or something like that. He ends up fouling him. But you notice, if I rewind this back a little bit, you notice just kind of how the setup is. Like the Clippers are, a team that has a ton of wings. The only guy non-wing that's on the floor right now is Pat and Zubac, who they start. But look, you notice that even though they have three wings in Morris, PG, and Kawhi, Pat gets the assignment on Luka. And what ends up happening is even in a help side situation, he gives up too much ground to Luka. And now Luka's one of the most skilled offensive players in the league. So it's probably unfair for me to be like, oh yeah, you know what? Of course, he's not going to be as good defending Luka because Luka's amazing, and that's fair. But that's not what I'm trying to illustrate. I'm trying to illustrate the disadvantages that Pat has when you play him against wing defenders, specifically guys that are 6-7 inches taller than him and have a higher weight advantage, strength advantage against him. And so simple things like this can happen. You get a situation where Luka just kind of overwhelms Pat going to the rim. Now here's this next one that I want you to see. Now watch what happens. Pat is on, I think, here Pat is on Tim Hardaway Jr., which is probably somebody, if you're going to play him against wings, you want to play him against guys who have a tendency to shoot jump shots, right? Like guys that are more 3-and-D oriented. And a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr. is a good example of a guy who's like that. Now allowing that mismatch with Zubac to take place against so now you've got the switch. He was originally on Tim Hardaway Jr., and now because Tim Hardaway lost the ball, and now you've got the switch on Luka here.
Luka over Patrick Beverly at the end of the shot.
So Luka ends up settling for a step back three, two dribble step to the left three, which is good. That works to Pat's advantage. Luka isn't able to. He doesn't try to use any advantage of his size. But one of the things that you'll notice is that even though Pat is in really, really good defensive position, he's got his lead foot set up and everything. He's trying to bait Luka into driving with his right hand into help. You can see where Kawhi and Marcus Morris are waiting for him. Zubac is right there. Luka doesn't take the bait, but you notice how easy it is for Luka to get this shot off. He just has too much of a height advantage against Pat. So if a player could shoot over him, obviously in this example Luka misses it, but if a player can shoot over him, that's a disadvantage to Pat, right? Something that makes his defense a little bit more ineffective. So again, you'll see another example here. Now remember, in this series, they put Pat on Luka initially, and Luka overwhelmed him enough where the Clippers had to change assignments. So they would play Terrence. If you guys remember, Terrence Mann had like a thing that went on with Luka. Like they would play Terrence Mann on Luka. They had to play Paul George on Luka. They had to play Marcus Morris on Luka. They had to eventually play Kawhi Leonard on Luka. They had to play their best wing defender on him. But the Clippers tried a lot of different players, and the first guy that they tried was Pat because he's very tenacious and stuff like that. And if you look at this example again, where he's being posted up, he's not trying to give up ground to Luka, even though he knows Luka has a size advantage on him. And so, of course, with Dallas's alignment here on the far side, you've got Kawhi, Paul George, and then you've got Terrence Mann over here in help position. So Kawhi's going to be that guy that helps. But watch what Luka does.
Make Luka and the Mavericks work. Luka on his way down.
See, so Luka knows that Kawhi's going to go there, so he doesn't go all the way to the rim. But as soon as he beats Pat's already out of position. So Luka takes sort of an off-balance. Luka ends up taking sort of like an off-balance floater here, and he's like leaning backwards. But in all honesty, that's a pretty good look. And I'm sure if he had to attempt that shot 10 times, he probably makes that 8 or 9 times out of it. And this is not to say that Pat's effort isn't good or the scheme isn't good, but just to give you an idea of how, like, his lack of size, but him being assigned on a wing defender can easily compromise a defense very quickly. We'll continue on to the next video. So again, here's another example of Luka and Pat just kind of match up against each other. Kleber tries to show a screen, but he doesn't end up taking one. Now Pat's already given up because Pat was getting ready to navigate this screen, but the screen never came, right? So you see Kleber set up, screen never comes. Pat's now stride for stride with Luka. Watch what happens. Pat plays good defense, tags him all the way, challenges the shot, but Luka's just bigger. He's just taller than him. And that's what my concern is that if the Lakers decide to play a system or they try to play a defense that doesn't actually have rim protection, or if teams do what they did to the Lakers last year, which is they try to get a switch set up where Anthony Davis can't help because he's too far away in the corner or he's out on the perimeter himself, or LeBron can't help or whatever it is. If you run into situations like that, then Pat is at a disadvantage against bigger wing defenders. And again, Luka's very skilled, so he can keep a live dribble. But remember, the Lakers are trying to say that Pat is going to guard like the premier wing guys on the opposing team. Premier wing guys are all skilled, right? They're the Paul Georges, the Luka Doncics, the LeBron James, obviously not on the team, the Kawhi Leonards. These are guys that don't get hassled by smaller guys because they play at their own pace. Jason Tatum's, Jaylen Brown's, those kind of guys.
Pat Bev is too small for him. And Beverly didn't want that.
Okay, so now here's another example of and you'll notice this, like that basically every team in the playoffs will always either run a high ball screen at some point to start the possession, and they either actually run the screen or they don't. And you'll see in some later clips where that shows up. So here's an example. If we roll this back again, so this play initially starts off, Pat's trying to anticipate this screen coming from Maxi Kleber, right? And you can see who's on Maxi. I think it's Kawhi that's on Maxi on this play. Yeah, it's Kawhi that's on Maxi. They know that this switch is going to come. They know that Ty Lue specifically sets up this assignment so that if Pat takes this switch, Luka tries to take this switch, you're going to end up having Kawhi on Luka. So Luka's smart, and he knows that he doesn't want to take that switch. So he rejects the screen. So Kleber knows within 2 seconds, okay, he's rejecting the screen, so I'm going to go off to the corner. So now Luka is on Pat, right? Now it's just Pat and Luka. And Pat's doing what he does. He's trying to hassle the live dribble. He's trying to move his feet. But again, Luka is skilled enough. He can dribble with either hand on a live dribble. That's not an issue at all. So as soon as Luka switches hands, he gets Pat on his hip. It's pretty much a wrap. Right? There's nobody else that can help because Dallas has set up this alignment to have all their shooters outside, so Kawhi can't really help. Sort of fake helps. Paul George doesn't come over to help because he has Tim Hardaway Jr. Luka gets a wide open layup and he's talking trash to Pat on the way back. So those examples of him defending Luka is an example of just sort of what I'm talking about. That the most skilled players in the NBA that are wings, they can do all the stuff that Luka does. Luka's amazing. So not to say that like it's very easy to replicate what he's doing, but guys like Tatum, guys like Paul George, guys like that are premier wings, the offense runs through them. This is what teams are going to do. They may not do it in the regular season, but that's what's going to happen in the playoffs. That's what they did to the Clippers when Pat was with the Clippers. And because of that, Pat's minutes fluctuated significantly because there were just certain guys that he couldn't defend because he was at a size disadvantage. So they would have to either use guys like Marcus Morris, Paul George, or Kawhi, or Terrence Mann, who's I think 6'5" or 6'6" himself. They would have to use guys like that, or even Nick Batum, who's also like 6'7" himself. Like they would have to use players like that. And in the Lakers situation, we don't have enough guys like that. We have LeBron, we have AD, maybe we have Troy Brown. I don't know how good of a defender he is. And then maybe we have Juan Toscano Anderson. There's also been this idea floated that Austin Reeves can play that role too. Like he's bigger, and so in theory he could, but he has a strength disadvantage unless he's bulked up and stuff like that. Strength wise, that was an issue for him last season. So like that sort of stuff matters a lot. Like those sort of small things matter a lot. And when we talk about using players in a general fashion, like we're doing with like the Lakers are trying to do with Patrick Beverly, by saying that he's going to be the guy who defends premier wings, or he can defend wings. Well, not all wings are the same, and if he's defending wings that are primarily 3-and-D guys like Royce O'Neal, Dorian Finney-Smith, guys like that who don't really put the ball on the floor, they just kind of catch and shoot threes or they pass it away, then for sure Pat can guard wings. But against the skilled wings in the league, that's not going to happen because he's at a size disadvantage. So for the next part here that I wanted to cover was to show you guys how he fared against a guy like Devin Booker and where there's advantages and where there isn't advantages for him. So let's take a look at it here. So one thing that I definitely want you guys to, before I play this all the way through, is that Phoenix would hit Pat with a lot of screens. For both Chris Paul and Devin Booker, they would always have DeAndre Ayton run screens. And so Pat always had to be chasing Devin Booker. He was never in a position where, he wasn't very often in a position where he could play him straight up, like you saw with the Luka examples. Mainly because he's very, very good at disrupting rhythm. That's a quality that Pat has. He knows how to crowd your feet. He knows how to get in your space. He knows how to affect what rhythm that you have. And so Phoenix would have to send screens to get Devin Booker enough separation in order to do it. And so what I want you guys to see is when Pat isn't assigned on a wing, right? Not a Luka Doncic size player. When he's assigned to a guy that's a little bit more his physicality, his height, a guy like Devin Booker, he can be more effective. And that's really the role that he should be in, right? You should have him checking guys that are at the very most 6'3", 6'4", guys that are not, super skilled, or not super skilled, that's not fair, because Devin Booker is very skilled. But, guys that are more physically closer to what he is, so that he's not at a disadvantage when it comes to his effort against offensive skill. So you see these examples. So you'll see, like, Pat navigates this he navigates this DeAndre Ayton screen attempt here.
41 points. They outscored the Jazz 41-22.
And you can see how he challenges Devin Booker's shot, right? Small things like this that he can do, he can harass Devin Booker with. Again, this is another example where he's just, it's no fault of his own. He's just trying to navigate this screen, right? He doesn't want to go under the screen because Devin Booker can walk right into a three, so he's chasing it over the top. The Clippers decided, according to scheme, that they wanted Pat to go over the screens. They didn't want him to go under the screens because they thought both Pat and Zubac were good enough to sort of squeeze squeeze a guy like Devin Booker into taking sort of, bad jumpers or out of rhythm jumpers. But you can see in this example that, like, Devin Booker goes right in rhythm and takes these jumpers. So even though Pat's trailing, he is at a little bit of a disadvantage because he can't really block Devin Booker from behind because Devin Booker has some height on him. But he does a pretty good job applying pressure from behind on Devin Booker and helping him block out. You'll see some more of this post. So again, here comes the screen. Pat recovers right back to his hip. Devin Booker just makes a really tough shot. But this is good defense. This is what you want. Now, if it's not Ivica Zubac in that situation, it's Anthony Davis. Maybe he hedges a little bit more and challenges Devin Booker. That in theory can work to the Lakers' favor. But again, if that's Luka Doncic, Pat's not going to affect him because Luka's just, he's 3 inches taller than Devin Booker. So that first game, the first two games of this series, Phoenix goes up 2-0 before Chris Paul comes back and does what Chris Paul does, which is slow down the game to a point where it actually probably hurts his team. But in Game 3, I believe, is what this is. In Game 3 or Game 4, Pat was a little bit more successful. Devin also missed, some pretty easy looks, but that he normally doesn't miss. And I think he was wearing a mask. He may have been wearing a mask this game that affected his seeing. But again, you'll see the effort that Pat puts in. Again, he knows the screen's coming, the screen navigation, and the main difference between this is for watch how close Paul George and Zubac squeeze him right at the free throw line. Right, like Zubac doesn't challenge it, but he doesn't play so far off that Devin can sort of take a pull-up jumper. Devin has to take this really long floater, which is still a good look, but for the most part, it might be a little bit more out of rhythm for him.
Strong, Beverly, quick outlet. Floating opportunity. Booker rises
so this is another example of off of an out of bounds play. So Booker's gonna get this ball. Pat's chasing Booker, and he's gonna get screened by Ayton, and Pat gets no help from Zubac. But you can see as Pat's chasing, this is one of those disadvantages that Pat has, right? Like, even though he's chasing behind the screen, Devin Booker gets his shot off pretty cleanly. He ends up missing it, but Pat's effort is always really good because he's always trying to chase guys. He manages not to foul Devin Booker in this process, But maybe it affects him enough to get this miss.
Shot won't go. Terrence Mann the rebound.
So again, watch. This play starts off with Devin Booker all the way down by the rim. Pat knows that this play is coming. He's calling it out. He knows the downswing is coming. He's behind Devin Booker, recovers, challenges it. Devin Booker makes a very tough shot. But you see how much more difficult the shot quality, or how much more difficult the shot is for Devin Booker. Again, he's a very skilled player, so it takes a lot to affect him. But that's an advantage that you can tolerate if you're a coach, or that's something you can tolerate with your defense, because you can see how it's affecting the opposing offensive player.
Booker rises up, jump shot too strong.
So again, see Pat's taking all these angles. Every angle that Pat takes, and this is something that he likes to do, the angles that he takes involve him cutting off your lane. He always likes trying to get to that spot before you can. And the reason why Devin Booker is so good is because he's a 3-level scorer. Or I would say at least 2-level, mid-range and from 3. He can be shaky at the rim at times. But Devin Booker has to settle for these mid-range shots. And he likes taking them, but it allows Pat to be there. So really what hurts, like the main concern about these sort of situations is that, like, if Pat is on a guy like Devin Booker, he's going to get screened. But the good part about this is, in the Lakers situation, if Anthony Davis is playing center, especially in the playoffs or something like that, it's Anthony Davis that's helping Pat out in these situations. It's not Ivica Zubac sitting back and drop, like in drop coverage and stuff like that. So there's a different type of pressure that Pat can apply without being concerned about, what happens on the rim and stuff like that. And, we have LeBron as a weak side defender and stuff like that. So that the way it works out is a little bit more different.
Shot too strong. Booker now 5 of 14.
So you'll see a lot of decent shots by Devin Booker that end up being misses. So watch. I really like this one. So watch how Pat is basically, he's like almost wrestling with Devin Booker because he knows Devin wants to take the screen. Pat ends up getting screened twice in this example, right? He ends up getting pushed by Devin Booker, so he gets some separation and then he gets screened like this little rub screen by Cameron Payne. But again, this is a good example. Like, Terrence Mann is there. You can see Ivica Zubac there. Like, they're expecting Pat to do a lot here. And Devin's walking into these mid-range shots. But in theory, if it's the Lakers, Pat's probably going right to whoever the center is, and Anthony Davis will just take that switch. So that look is not as easy as you see it. But that's two different ways, right? Like, you didn't see as many screens with Luka where Luka took the screen. Luka would play him straight up, which is more difficult on Pat. But with this Devin Booker situation, Devin needs the screen, right? The Suns have to help Devin get separation from Pat. So now you're forcing the opposing team to have to commit effort or commit assets or commit, power or energy or whatever you want to call it, to just helping a guy get free. And the Lakers can dictate behavior to some degree in some of these matchups if they want to. So here's an example of Devin Booker picking up his dribble, right? And so Pat's got him sealed off. Devin Booker gets a pretty decent look off here, but again, it's only because of his height. It's not because he does anything extraordinary to beat Pat off the cuff. It's he's fading away, taking a jumper. But because the difference between Devin Booker and Pat isn't as much as it would be Luka against Pat, Pat can affect this shot a little bit more. Small things. That's really what makes the biggest difference for this team. For a guy like Pat.
4 minutes gone.
And so those are all the clips that I have for just sort of this exercise. But what I really I hope like watching the video helps sort of illustrate what I'm trying to talk about. Like, it's not that we can't use him as a wing defender. There are teams out there that will downsize and play 6'4" guys or 6'5" guys at the 3, and you can play Pat in those situations. But this idea, which I think is the general idea that people have had, is that Pat can defend premier wings and be effective against them, and Dennis Schroeder goes and guards. And then, look, these things all apply to a guy like Dennis Schroeder too as well. He's just too small to guard wings. So we have to be really smart about how we deploy them. And one of my concerns is that if the Lakers continue doing this strategy or moving forward with this strategy and not being cognizant or just being aware of the disadvantage in weight and height, our players could end up getting hurt because of it, just because of the overall attrition and wear and tear that can happen on the body. You know, similar to asking Anthony Davis to play the five full time, his body just can't hold up to it. And so that sort of thing is something that, like, I think the Lakers should definitely be considered of, and it's why I am not on board with this idea that people are presenting that like, you know, if Russ is traded, then you can play Dennis and Pat together. Like, I don't think that's a good idea, and I don't like the idea of Pat being a guy who's supposed to be defending threes that are 6-7 inches taller than him, because it's just too much of a physical disadvantage for him to be successful. And it's really just not fair. It's sort of setting him up for failure. So I hope the videos sort of help sort of illustrate better what I was trying to show you guys. I tried to do it from playoffs because it's you know, it's more relevant than what happens in the regular season. But again, the whole idea behind this is that he's a good defender. The Lakers shouldn't be assigning him to guys that will like actually hurt, you know, like make his effectiveness even less because he's at a physical disadvantage against the assignments that he is being put on. It's not to say that he's not capable of doing anything, or he's not capable of being mismatched on a final possession and winning that possession. Pat's very capable of doing stuff like that. But the idea that he can do this over the course of 60 games or 80 games, stay healthy and be effective and stay out of foul trouble, it's just not fair, in my opinion, to put him in that position. And so I hope the Lakers do, you know, find capable wings or add more wings to the roster so that a guy like Pat doesn't have to do this and they clear up their logjam. But I hope the videos sort of helped out illustrate just sort of what the advantages and disadvantages are of how you use a guy like Pat and a guy like Dennis and a guy like Nunn and Russ and all these other guys too as well that are all in the sort of same height bracket. So as always, I appreciate you guys watching. If you could like the video, that helps out a lot. If you haven't subscribed, I highly encourage you to subscribe. I have a lot of cool stuff, a lot of cool ideas on the way. You know, doing more than one episode a week, doing a weekend update style variety show on the weekends. A lot of different things that I'm kind of sort of ideas that I have out there that I'm working out that I'm excited to share in a couple of weeks with everybody. So as always, I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you guys have, you know, whether you're watching during the day or in the evening, I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful evening. And I'll see you guys in the next video.